In this episode, Jeffrey speaks with Gretchen Carlson and her husband Mike about her 2024 book, Trauma Recovery Pathways. Unlike many clinical resources, this book combines Gretchen's personal experience with PTSD, mindfulness strategies, and practical tools to inspire healing. With degrees in psychology and criminal justice and over 22 years in local government, she now runs Black Squirrel Publishing and is developing a cookbook and workbook to expand on her recovery methods. Mike, a heavy equipment operator and cancer survivor, has spent the last decade in sobriety and now mentors others as the director of groups at Quest 180 through Eagle Brook Church. He shares his fishing and bait making expertise on his YouTube channel, Hunting for Gills. During this conversation, Gretchen opens up about her struggles with suicidal ideation, a suicide attempt, and the challenges of reclaiming her life after a workplace accident, traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and job loss. Mike shares how he has balanced his own healing while supporting Gretchen through PTSD, and together with their grown daughter, they have navigated immense hardships to find healing and a renewed sense of purpose. Their honest and resilient stories are a powerful testament to transformation and hope, even in the darkest of times. Gretchen and Mike share how their faith has played a key role in their healing journey. While we at AMP do not necessarily share their faith, we respect their experience and recognize that healing looks different for everyone. We welcome and support all paths that foster growth, resilience, and well-being. As part of our commitment to supporting others on their healing paths, we're collaborating with Gretchen to develop a trauma checklist that helps individuals recognize symptoms and take steps towards recovery. Additionally, we highlight the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline for anyone in a crisis, ensuring support is always within reach. We hope this conversation offers you insight and encouragement.
Gretchen Carlson and Mike, welcome. As you know, I'm Jeffrey, and I'm host of this podcast, and we're absolutely thrilled and want to extend a warm welcome to you to discuss your book and your life and your beautiful work on trauma and how it impacts relationships and what you've been through. Because our audience, I think, is going to be very interested in what you've been through and who you are and what you're bringing to the topic. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gretchen, your beautiful book entitled Trauma Recovery Pathways, it paves a mindful road through trauma into renewal and to recovery and thriving. And I think that the audience and readers are going to find some real gems because trauma touches all of us. And I think they're in for a treat to read what you've got there and to get to know you better. And I have a sense that the other things that you're providing to the world are also going to be blessings. And we're going to enjoy hearing from you about that as well. So, you're writing about this harrowing, severe traumatic experience with a workplace accident that left you with intense physical injuries, a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, major depressive disorder, anxiety, brain injury, lots of challenges, loss of job, had to rebuild everything. And Mike walked with you in this marriage and through your trauma. You've been together 35 years. You've got this grown daughter. And you've navigated all of this, and we want to understand both what teachings you can bring to us through your experience and, talk a little bit about what you've been through. This story is not just about survival, it's about thrival. And you have been together for a long time, and you met when you were 18 years old, and you've been together ever since, which is a beautiful long-term story. I love it. Before we get into that really beautiful chapter 3 on relationships and PTSD, I'm curious if there's anything about the book that you want to highlight that feels important, in your opinion, for our listeners.
So the book was just pretty much born out of my desire to help others, because what I went through is not something I would wish on anybody. And especially when you're wondering, what is wrong with me before you get a diagnosis? I searched for what's wrong with me. Why, after I had this accident, why am I feeling this way? Why am I screaming at my husband for no reason? And I didn't find any books that were written by survivors, non-medical type books. There's that book out there called The Body Keeps the Score by a very famous psychologist. And here I am, I'm a survivor. This is what I did. And healing isn't just one size fits all. So I try to include things in my book, even that did not work for me, hoping that it would work for others.
That's really good. A few things I really liked about the book. One of the things was that some of your quotes are really nice. And two right off the bat that fit together perfectly. One was Robert Frost. The best way out is always through. And yet, here's the second one. Avoidance is the refuge of fear by Mary Catherine Bateson. Sure, the best way is always through, but yet, we tend to avoid. And we know that sometimes our fear trumps our action to get through. So many of my clients, when they're describing anxiety and certain things in their history don't really line up to suggest they have an anxiety disorder, we check their history of trauma. And most times they'll say, yeah, the anxiety started after the trauma. And when we clear the trauma, their anxiety goes away. I also liked your personal and professional language mix. Proficiency in articulating some of the scientific and practical, but kind of a warm, welcoming, personal style. It's a really nice combo.
Thank you. My goal was not to use a lot of technical words, but I still wanted to explain what trauma is, what is PTSD and the different kinds. I still wanted to give people a basic understanding of it. I didn't want to talk down to people. I wanted it to be like I was sitting there with you on a bench. I was just a friend explaining, here's what it is. This is what happened. And so thank you. I'm glad you liked that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and that's one reason why I really want to promote it with my clients, because that's the kind of thing that they can warm up to. And yeah, you referenced acute, chronic, complex developmental traumas. And there's, like 5 more that I know of, but who talks about that? Thrilled that you mentioned EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing for treating trauma. I'm trained in that, been using it since 2007. And also some of the other techniques that are really great. I was looking for brain spotting mentioning, and I'm an advocate and certified in brain spotting for clearing trauma. And so it's great, but you did such a nice job of really helping people see what's out there. You mentioned mindfulness. You mentioned these grounding techniques, putting hands in cold water, exercise, self-kindness, breathing, yoga, meditation. A very holistic approach, which I loved. So I want to celebrate that and say thank you for that.
Absolutely. The putting your hands in cold water. I would even throw cold water on my face.
Yeah. There's one thing that you referenced in the book that I'm going to ask you to share with us a little more details about, because I am not something I've not used. I'd like you to share with the listeners about the mindfulness scripts and how you use them.
So it's something my therapist brought up with me, and they can be very helpful because they offer giving you a structure and like a guidance. They help to break down your emotions. If you can imagine going through it, you have so many emotions, but it helps you break them down. I think I mentioned 3 of them in the book: releasing emotional pressure, non-judgmental, and confidence boosting. And the one I used the most was confidence boosting. It's almost like meditation, but it's a script. So you follow in the book, I have step by step how to practice it. Confidence boosting was my favorite one, like I said, where you accept the present for what it is. So it's almost on a spiritual level too. So with this confidence boosting mindfulness, you have to accept who you are. So accept who you are in the moment. And at first I had trouble with it because accepting that you're a complete mess, it was hard for me. My dad always taught me, you work hard and you work hard no matter what. Because of my accident, I couldn't work for so long. And so I just felt like I was a failure. When you practice this mindfulness, the key of it is to accept how we're feeling and just let it go. And don't let it define you. I was feeling like a failure, but I was not a failure. It got easier for me to acknowledge that that was just a feeling. It wasn't who I was. And then to let it go.
Yeah.
And that letting go, I think, is where the confidence boosting comes in. Where if we don't accept it, like you're having these thoughts and feelings, if you don't accept it, if you can't accept it, you can't let it go.
Right. I love that. There's a
Yeah.
lot there. You're referencing also what sounds like a lot of like radical acceptance, which like the book Tara Brach wrote,
Yep.
who in one of her books talks about the RAIN technique that you mentioned in the book, which is recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture.
Yep.
And I love that you mentioned that, and I love her work. I also really appreciated the podcast listing and resources that you referenced.
Yeah, that came out of my daughter. Our daughter is she loves listening to podcasts. And
Mhm.
just through talking with her of certain ones, I recognize how powerful that they can be.
Can we talk a little bit about trauma and post-traumatic stress and kind of getting into the depth of your experience with these things?
Hmm.
So my understanding is that trauma, the word trauma comes from the Greek and its origin meaning having to do with wound, to pierce, mostly physical. And then much later we added the psychological, emotional piece and psychic piece. And so for you, do you want to say anything about trauma and PTSD in terms of your depth of process with it?
I not only had the trauma from the physical accident of falling on the stairs, hitting my back and my neck and my head against concrete, losing consciousness. That was trauma. But I also had the trauma of when I woke up and my coworkers were surrounding me and nobody called 911. Nobody helped me. People even made jokes about Bob Saget. It was found out that he had hit his head, went to sleep, and he died of trauma to his head. So that was a second kind of a trauma then. And then also having to figure out how to get myself to urgent care and driving there by myself. But before that happened, also, another part of my trauma was that I was inside a city hall building and there's cameras everywhere. So I told a coworker of mine, a lot of this was fuzzy, but I told him that I had fallen on these stairs in City Hall, and he said, "Oh, well, let me pull up the video." And I wasn't prepared for that as I sat there and watched. So my trauma was like threefold, the physical, and then the coworkers not helping me, and watching myself fall, and having to drive to the urgent care. The first two urgent cares I went to were closed. I don't even know how I got to the other one, and I had to keep stopping to throw up on the side of the road.
Wow.
Yeah, my PTSD was pretty deep. And the trauma was several folds over, and like I didn't even know
Yeah.
depth of it until it unfolded. I mean, I could talk about it now, but I couldn't for a long time, and it took months
Yeah. Yeah.
before I could. But like I said,
I
I don't
go
want
ahead.
anybody to go through that and be shameful and blaming yourself.
Yes.
Like I shouldn't have walked through the snow before I went over there and walked down the stairs, and just blaming myself for the accident, which is insane. We know that, but at the time going through it,
Yeah.
my brain was trying to make sense out of what happened.
Yes. Good luck on that note. And I want to honor that you're doing something important here for the listeners. You're talking about, and going back to the Greeks, the word pierce in reference to the original meaning of the word trauma. Your trauma pierced your social relationships, your psychology, your own sense of self, all sorts of parts of you. And trauma can do that. It's very impacting on multiple levels, and it's really important for us to hear that. So thank you for elucidating that. I can hear the discomfort inside when you reference it. And so I want to honor that it's not easy at all what you've been through.
Definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to jump into chapter 3 if I can. Page 30, you said PTSD casts an imposing shadow over relationships. So we're going to get into, for both of you, in what ways is that so? How is it for both of you that PTSD settled in as the entity of an affair? It's the third thing in the relationship that you didn't ask for when you got married, but boom, there it is. It takes up so much energy in your relationship. It's got a shadow side to it. It's there, you're dealing with it. And so I just want to hear what it was like to have this traumatic thing just evolve inside and impact your world.
It's like PTSD moved in and took over. And it really was a third presence in our marriage, I thought. It was unwelcome. It was unrelenting that neither of us invited in, came in and brought its bags and unpacked them. And no matter how much Mike loved me, he couldn't fix me. I'll let him talk on that, but it affected how I reacted to things, how I processed emotions, and how I saw myself, like you said before. And there were days that I felt completely disconnected from Mike. And it's hard to tell where that came from, not because I wanted to be disconnected with him, but the trauma had taken up so much space, like in our home, it was there, and that there wasn't room for anything else. Like it was pushing away us, and it's relentless. And it was more powerful than I was for a long, long time. And it's exhausting. I knew it was hard for him to see me struggle and to see me withdraw, and he didn't always understand it. And I didn't always know how to help him understand it. Like I didn't have the capacity to help him. And honestly, sometimes I didn't know either. Like it's like it didn't come with a manual. This PTSD that was here, it didn't come with a manual. And it tests everything that you knew about yourself: love, patience, trust. But what I do know is that Mike never gave up on me, even when I felt lost within my own depression and anxiety and fear and anger. I had so much anger, but that made all the difference, is that he didn't give up on me. And I knew, I could feel he didn't. Even after screaming at him for no reason at all, or for some stupid minor little thing, I could feel that he didn't give up on me. So that was one fear that I never had. I'm not saying other people won't have it, but that's one fear at least I didn't have to carry with me was, is he going to leave me? Is he going to give up on me and just say, forget it, it's not worth it? But I could feel that he would never do that.
Yes. What a champion of love. Mike, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this topic.
Just sitting here listening to all it makes me think that being an alcoholic, the same thing. I brought that into our marriage, and had my tragedies involved. I lost a job over it. I had all my legal issues and stuff. It wasn't something that I planned on doing, and somebody stood by me the whole time and was understanding. And all of a sudden I realized that the shoe was on the other foot. I mean, I had been in recovery and working with other alcoholics and, working through the steps and, learned so much about myself, going through like the fourth and fifth step, evaluating who I was and why my life turned out the way it is. Now I was starting to see the shoe on the other foot, that everything that was going on, now she had the problem and I was there to try and, figure out what I was going to do. And I was just seeing so many parallels to all the stuff that I put her through and the way she stood by me, and that she knew that that wasn't the real me. That wasn't the person I was mere years. I mean, I spiraled fast. I went from not drinking anything to being in treatment and everything else within just a few years. Realizing that she stood by me because she knew that wasn't the person I was, and she dealt with it. She helped me. She tried. I found out that, I realized the shoe was on the other foot, that every time there was an outburst, like she never got angry before, but I would be sitting there and I would just hear like a scream and hear things flying across the room in another room. And instead of getting mad or upset about it or anything, or trying to fix the problem, I realized there was something else going on there. And all I could do was be there to support her. And, when things got out of hand, not take it as a direct attack on me, that this wasn't who
Yes.
she really was. For a while there, she was the smartest person I knew. And it got to the point where I really had to control myself, not trying to finish sentences or put words in her mouth because she couldn't remember simple things were just completely baffling her. And she was there for me for so long when I was going through what I was going through that I now saw what she was going through when the shoe was on the other foot. I guess that being an alcoholic really kind of helped me out to be able to help her out.
Thank you for that. What a powerful statement that you're both saying. You were supported by the other person in a time when your own shame was huge. And their love held up the container of the relationship when you didn't have the ability to really show up the way you used to. And then when the shoe's on the other foot, you give to them when they can't necessarily show up the way that you're used to. So you're returning the love that you received, and you're still creating a container sufficiently for a beautiful, loving relationship, which is so admirable and so heroic and sheroic. So thank you for exemplifying that.
I've
So
also found that it seems like we're never both at the same low point. It's usually if one of us is down, the other one
yeah,
is in a good spot and positive about things. She had her injury, and about the time she was starting to get back on her feet was when my cancer diagnosis showed up. So it's like, I was there for her, and then all of a sudden the shoe was on the other foot, and now I had a battle to deal with, and she was there. And it's usually if one of us is up and while the other one's down, things work out great. We've had our times where we've both been down, and it's just, you get angry with each other, and that never leads to anything good. But if one of us is in a good place, we bring the other person back.
yeah. And that's a sign of a quality, deep, good, healthy relationship in my book. Mike, I want to push you a little bit more since you were just speaking. So if you don't mind, and you never have to answer any of my questions, either one of you, but it would be easy, and I think the listeners want to understand this too. It'd be easy for you to feel rejected, confused, triggered relationally, especially if you have rejection issues when Gretchen would, have her challenges and not be able to engage, and maybe, maybe your own sense of protecting yourself or defensive reactions or compassion fatigue, which is often the case for people who are loved ones doing their best to take care of someone who's got a chronic illness, a mental illness, combination, injuries, dying process. So I want to hear what your thoughts are about any of that.
Well, like I said, it's once I realized that she wasn't the person, or what was affecting her wasn't the normal. And I mean, there was plenty of times where I'd get frustrated and just get tired of being yelled at or snapped at. And like I said, luckily for me, I got my recovery meetings every Tuesday night, and I have a pretty good support group there. Some of my other directors are, my long-term friends, people who have been in recovery as long as I have. There's a couple of them that they know both of us. They're friends of ours, so they understand this. And that was still, I may not have been going there to discuss my problems with alcohol addiction, but I had people that were there for me if I needed to vent. Because if I vented to Gretchen, I didn't want to hurt her feelings and add to any of her anxiety. But sometimes it'd just be something I had to get off my chest. And I did have people who I could take. So what you hear here stays here kind of thing, where I could go there and talk to these people, and it was in confidentiality, just to get something off your chest. It's kind of like hitting a reset and being able to come back home and have a different perspective. Like we've talked before, it's at church. Everybody talks about finding God. Well, God was never lost, but I found my way to God, and so I'm surrounded with people who are in the same mental state as me as far as their beliefs go. And
Sure.
it's usually a good place to go find some answers, was with the people that were in my groups.
Yes, and that is why I hold online men's groups once a month, and our last newsletter was about men's groups. Because when you can have a container of safety and confidentiality to talk about things without feeling guilty about it, and set a boundary where you're not talking to your partner from a place of anger, because it may engender more guilt on their part that you're upset, It's a safe place to do it with a bunch of other people. So kudos to you for reaching out and receiving that support.
Thanks.
It's really smart.
I'd say something I just recently told her this. I've been hearing it for years. It's, before you open your mouth or, take that drink or take that drug or whatever you're doing, it's play the movie to the end. Stop for a second and think about your actions and where is it going to get you? Where has it gotten you in the past? And
Yes.
in a situation where she's not using the same logic and reason that she did before her
Oh,
action,
that's good.
he's snapping back and throwing something back in her face that she said.
That's nice.
It's a momentary thing. It'd be a momentary lapse of really good judgment on my part to throw
Yes.
something out there that's going to be
Yes.
in the wrong way and probably be more mean, spiteful, hurtful than it was really
That's
intended
right.
to be. And
That's
it's just it's play the movie to the end, and when you realize where it's going to wind up when you say that, then it's usually enough of a deterrent to keep your mouth closed and check your words.
Yes. A lot of wisdom there. Not always easy when you have an impulsive reactivity, when it goes in the mind, out the mouth, and you don't have impulse control to hold that and then go reflective because you're dysregulated. So that's one thing that people really need to master before they can keep it to yourself and then play it out thoughtfully, mindfully. Really good point, though. I want to talk a little bit with you, Gretchen, about, from a mental health perspective. Did you ever consider harming yourself in an intensive way throughout this process?
I did. I was suicidal for many weeks,
Mm-hmm.
months even. A couple times I had even thought out about how I would do it.
Yep.
One time I tried, except my plan failed, luckily. In talking with my therapist about it, she told me about the suicide help prevention line, the 988 number. But many times when I was suicidal, I was just in a place where I couldn't think of the number. And of course, my brain injury didn't help for me to think of the number. What she told me was call the 988 number when you're not feeling suicidal. Call it at a time when you're relaxed and able to just call it to get familiar with it. Because then, even if I'm in that place with suicidal thoughts, more than likely it would occur to me to call that number if I had practiced it before. And I did that and it worked. And I even put sticky notes up, 988, all over the house. When we had guests over, some people would ask me what that was for, and I just told them. But that really helped me to call the number when I wasn't suicidal. And at first, I was afraid to do that because I thought I would get scolded for using the number when it wasn't, essential that I had to call it. But she said, no, just they're really nice people, and just call it and get familiar with it, get familiar calling it. And I did, and that worked like a charm.
Yeah. I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing that with us. And that's a brilliant strategy. And it also applies when I'm working with couples, I say, use some of the strategies we're talking about when things are calm and good and you feel regulated, because you don't want to have to wait until you're having a really hard argument to try something that feels really cerebral, because you're going to be upset, which is your midbrain. And you can't have access always to your prefrontal cortex where you've stored some of that other stuff intellectually.
Yep.
So I really like that technique that you're talking about. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So did you push away Mike's overtures for assistance sometimes because you just felt either overwhelmed or ashamed or whatever?
I think I did. I don't remember any specific times when I did. But I think he was guarded, and like we talked about before, how he was trying not to fix me. I think he was careful not to do that. I remember sometimes probably yelling at him for maybe a comment that he said out of love, trying to help me, early
Sure,
on
of course.
when we were both trying to navigate what is wrong with me. I think I probably did, but I think we know each other enough that when I did do that, he knew to back off immediately
Sure.
and not try to push any kind of
Yeah.
assist on me.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Mike in a second if you wanted to share anything in reference to your suicidal thinking, because I hear a lot of partners say, I'm afraid to do certain things because they're going to be suicidal and I don't want to trigger anything. So I'm walking on eggshells. But I also want to reference that some people believe that PTSD, because it's in the diagnostic manual for mental health disorders, that it is an illness. It's illness related in a pathological perspective. That is not true. Humans are wired to have a response to things that are crises and to trauma. Because it's a natural response to traumatic experience, PTSD is our best coping strategy given the way we're wired. That is not pathological, but it can be pathological in how it impacts our capacity to function in the world. So it's not a mental disorder. It is a behavioral and lifestyle disorder if it becomes really problematical. Does that make sense? And do you agree?
Yeah. I just want to say that I was in fight or flight for so long,
Of
and it
course.
just wore me down. I was
Yeah.
completely exhausted, mentally and physically exhausted,
Yep.
running from that lion that was no longer chasing me.
Right,
And
exactly.
yeah, I totally agree. Even though I was afraid to walk downstairs for a long time after my accident, I had to realize that stairs were no longer a danger to me. I mean, more than
Yes.
likely, I wasn't going to walk downstairs and fall like I did again. So that
Right.
was part of my recovery. Part of my treatment was eventual exposure to stairs again.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is why, if you did an online search for best treatments for PTSD, exposure therapy is super popular, and cognitive behavioral therapy is super popular for you to manage top-down management of reactivity. But then you've got the EMDR and the brain spotting and a few other things. Mike, any thoughts for you about what it was like dealing with Gretchen's suicidal thinking and attempt?
Yeah, I was really unaware of it. It's not like she came out and told me about it. I suppose that she was embarrassed or didn't want me to know about it. And I've personally never had a suicidal thought before. I just don't. I mean, when I hear people that do have it, I mean, I know it's real. I know that everybody's different. I think I've had some bad experiences in my life where I really wanted to escape, but I've never thought that that's not like a go-to thing for me, so I don't associate it with other people because we like to think that everybody thinks and does things the way we do. And we find out when we talk to people that we're all completely different. And I mean, I found out as an alcoholic that things I was doing that I thought was perfectly normal, that everybody did it. All of a sudden, I realized that I was in a room full of people that thought like that, but we were all wrong. And so it's like that being suicidal or wanting to end my life, not something that's crossed my mind. So it's hard for me to think that if I said something, it would cause somebody else to do it. So I guess I never really thought that anything I was going to say was going to push her over the edge. I mean, I was trying to, like you said, walk on eggshells and realize the situation and not try to do anything to upset her. But like I said, I at first I was unaware of it. She finally told me about it, and I was pretty shocked by it because it's
Yeah.
just not in my wheelhouse of thinking. It was kind of like a foreign idea to me that I mean, I knew it happened. I mean, I've
Yes.
known people that have taken their lives. It wasn't something that I ever considered a solution to any of my problems. So I don't associate it with other people, I guess.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate your perspective on this. It's a delicate topic for people in relationships, because we don't often think that way ourselves. When our loved one does, it can be really kind of shocking and concerning. I have learned in the 34 years of being a mental health provider that 99% of the time when people are talking about suicide, it's because they're struggling with something in their life that they just don't know another way to deal with it. And it's the mind is constantly scanning for a way out of the pain of the situation. And death, the mind going to, well, that is a way for me to get out. Although it's costly and I don't value that, but my mind thinks that way. And so we're entertaining just about anything in order to deal with our pain about something. And so when you say to the person on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 is I'm gonna take myself out, where are you at? And if we can magically take a magic wand and get you feeling completely better and more positive and heal some of these dynamic pieces, would you still want to be in life? Most people say yes. Would you agree, Gretchen?
Yes, definitely. And a big part of when I was having suicidal thoughts was that I would have these unnatural thoughts for me because of my faith. I would never think to do that, but the
Right.
pain was just almost unbearable that I couldn't think of any other way. And
Mhm.
luckily, the sane part of my brain would take over. When I would have these thoughts, the same part would take over and say, no, you don't want to leave your family like this. You don't want to sin against God this way. You don't want to do this. But my fear was that I talked to with my therapist many times was I was afraid that my sane part, the suicidal thoughts would just take over. And I was just deathly afraid that I wouldn't have that same part intervene for me on my behalf. And I was afraid. I was so afraid. But yes, I mean, I agree that, yeah, nobody would want to think that way. It's not a choice. The PTSD and the depression just taking over. And even at times, I started to hear not voices, but I started to hear it was a man's voice saying, I remember walking into a restaurant with my mom and my sister, and I heard this man's voice say, Gretchen. That was also scary. So that changed my diagnosis for a little while because I had
Yes.
major depression with, I forget what they call it, but it was with hearing voices.
Psychotic features.
Yes. But I'm also with my book trying to work with the Invisible Wounds Project and other groups who deal with, these invisible illnesses, these invisible type injuries.
Beautiful and courageous on your part. I want to mention that suicide can sometimes seem like relief from extreme exhaustion, that even if you have ideas about the way out, you don't have the energy to go through it. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Yes, I totally agree. The one
Mhm.
time that I did come up with a plan with my analytical brain or what was left in my analytical brain, I'm like, well, then I'd have to do this and I'd have to do that. And it just got, yeah, it did get very exhausting thinking
Sure.
about all the what ifs and how to follow through and would this really work? The
Yeah.
exhaustion is real.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Mike, for you to see these posters around the house, knowing that that's associated with suicidal thinking, that could be a little unsettling.
Some days you didn't know what you're walking into. It's especially when you go to work and you come home and you've been dealing with everybody at work and you just want to come home and have some peace and quiet, and you never knew what you're going to be walking into. At that time, it was a lot of doctor appointments and everything else going on. So she was having a busy day too, and it's like never quite knew what you're going to walk into some days.
Just like medical issues, as you know, every day can be different. And so that's why the container of a strong relationship for you both allows you to deal with whatever comes up because things are changing all the time and you can talk about it, which is why couples need to have really good, vulnerable, real conversations with each other on a regular basis, especially when they're going through things like what you've been through.
Definitely.
I was really intrigued by what you wrote, Gretchen. You said, depression is a call for assistance. Sadness can help you prioritize emotional awareness. Anger calls us to see a sense of being treated unfairly. And so my question is then, okay, what does PTSD call you to?
I think it's a call for us to be resilient. It's a call for patience. It's a call for a deeper understanding of ourselves and other people.
Mm.
And it forces us to confront our pain, a pain that we never ever asked for, and emotions that we never expected. And it calls us to heal by pushing through and almost like the alcoholic, like what's inside me? What is inside of me? And it demands that we find new ways to live and to love and to connect with other people, even when everything feels broken.
That
It's
was beautifully said.
it's very demanding. PTSD is.
Things that are spiritual often are.
Mhm.
Have either of you ever heard of this idea, post-traumatic growth opportunity? Have you heard about that?
No, but
No.
I love how it sounds.
I do too. I mean, really talk about resiliency, but you could look it up, post-traumatic growth opportunity, which is just like taking a good crisis and saying, all right, what's my opportunity? And what do I have to deal with this? And what resources would I need in order to make it a growth opportunity? And if we have a perspective about that on the front end of a trauma, we're kind of ahead of the game. But most people are so blown aside by a trauma that comes in that they never even ask about those things. So it's a resiliency perspective that I just want to share with you and check and see if you'd heard about that, but it's something to look up for you.
I'm definitely going to look it up. And as you were explaining that, this thought just popped into my brain, like, what if we have a checklist for people? When you have a trauma,
Yeah.
have a checklist. Like when I was going through everything, I didn't even know at first what it was, but if I would have had a checklist, like if the people in my recovery team would have said, here's a checklist for you, write down notes as you're going through it and questions that you might have, and what is the opportunity for me to grow in this area and that area,
Yes.
before you lose that,
Yeah.
because when you're going through it is when it's most vivid. So if you had that checklist and you could take notes, it could almost be like a journaling notebook with different prompts as to what are my opportunities for growth during everything that I'm going through every step of the way. I love that.
Gosh, that was a brilliant idea you just suggested. And I'm happy to talk with you more about what that might look like. Again, going back to the idea that if we can think about these things when our life is relatively calm and regulated, we have full access to our resources to create something like that so that when things happen, we go right to it. And our care team goes, oh, yeah, let's do something with this since we've already created it. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel during a very difficult time when you don't have the energy, time, or resources internally to do it. And
Exactly.
if we're talking about external resources, social, relational, spiritual, physical, nutritional resources, and how do I use those to get through some of these things, then it's a holistic perspective.
Yep. Love it.
I want to go back to chapter 3 for just a moment. Is there anything else related to relationality, trauma, PTSD that you want to highlight before we come in for a landing? Either one of you.
I guess the biggest thing would be to not take it personally. It changes how we think and react, how we love, but it's not about the other person. If I'm over here crying, the other person shouldn't assume it's because of something they did. The people, the relationships, coworkers, friends, neighbors, whatever, need to recognize that they should just be patient with this person, even when it's hard. And for them to learn about what PTSD is very helpful. Like I had to learn about alcoholism, when Mike was going through his, and also codependency was huge.
Oh, yes.
I had to learn
Very
about
good.
that. Mike would have had a manual or just a way to learn about what PTSD is. And of course, not to try to fix the other person,
Well
just
said.
to support the other person or the person in your life going through PTSD, but don't lose yourself in the process of that.
Oh my gosh, that's a beautiful statement. That's a chapter by itself, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
it
Mike,
is.
anything you want to add?
I like to fix things. So Gretchen would come to me with something and it'd be like somebody at work did this and I would tell her what to do. I learned that not every situation is there for me to fix.
Yeah.
And with this whole thing, that a lot of it was like rhetorical questions that didn't need an answer, just needed to be acknowledged for the support, that there was things that I wasn't going to be able to fix. And that even if I thought I could fix them, she didn't need me to fix them. It was just, like you said, the filter between your brain and your mouth is like things came out of both of us. There's just nothing you could do about it. You just took it in and let it go and not try to fix every situation.
Yeah.
So it's that learning to find when do you really need help finding that word you can't remember, or
Yeah.
you just need to talk it through and I just need to be here to listen.
Right. And I want to compliment you for your awareness to be mindful of all of that. And a lot of men I work with have learned that when our partners say, stop trying to fix me, I am not something broken that you have to make a problem out of, and you're not the one to solve it. It's like, wow, okay, how can I be most supportive of you? Let her decide, if at all. Kudos to you for really getting that. That's a very important thing, particularly, I think, for men, because we're raised to be problem solvers. I'd like to interrupt here after the original conversation to expand on what I touched upon and address important nuances. When I talked about men being raised to be fixers, I want to acknowledge that that isn't just a male experience. Many people, including women, are conditioned to solve problems rather than sit with emotions. Men, however, are often socialized to be independent and relied upon for answers, which reinforces the belief that their value comes from providing solutions rather than expressing vulnerability. This makes it harder for many men to simply be with emotions. Meanwhile, women who struggle with this may feel there's something wrong with them, as they are expected to be naturally more emotionally attuned, adding pressure and self-doubt. Fixer coping mechanisms develop when problem solving is valued over expressing emotions, often due to being raised by absent, emotionally unavailable, mentally unstable, or neglectful caregivers. Witnessing dysfunction or receiving praise for responsibility while their own needs were ignored. Cultural expectations, fear of rejection, and role models also reinforce this. Factors like growing up as a parentified child or with avoidant attachment contribute to this tendency. And for many, this coping style isn't just a habit, but a necessity shaped by their environment. These patterns develop as survival mechanisms, not merely learned behaviors. At its core, the impulse to fix isn't just about helping others. It's often a way to protect ourselves. When we focus on solutions, we don't have to face the vulnerability of feelings or sit with our own pain or the pain of other people. Fixing gives us a sense of control, making the uncertainty of emotions feel more manageable and minimizing our anxiety. But here's the key. Real connection and real healing doesn't come from fixing alone. It comes from blending resolution with emotional connection. We need both the ability to solve problems and the ability to sit with emotions, to be present with them, and to allow space for them. It's in this balance that true growth happens.
Now we're returning to our recorded discussion where Jeffrey, Gretchen, and Mike dive into Chapter 3, Relationships and PTSD. You can find the link to this chapter in the show notes and in our Campfire newsletter for subscribers. Here's the conversation.
I want to add that I was excited about this particular chapter, partly because in the curriculum that I've written, there's several phases, and one whole phase is about mental health and relationality. So we're merging mental health trauma with relational understanding, working through problems, sharing, working together, acknowledging we both have shadows, we both have wounds, we both have our dark sides and things that, we struggle with, and how to be in a container of a loving relationship while dealing with that material is very maturing and very sobering. It can break apart a lot of relationships. So when we know how to take care of ourselves as a partner and work with the other person relationally in the midst of some of these things, it can help create a more enduring, close, vulnerable, thriving relationship. And that's what I'm trying to bring to more consciousness and practical skill sets in the curriculum. So thank you for allowing me to work with you through this chapter to support my work.
You're very welcome. Just really want to thank you for inviting us on here and sharing a lot about our life and all these personal experiences that we've had. But we just hope that your listeners will get something out of it and, see that there is hope. There is a way out of PTSD, and hopefully by, reading my book, they'll see I put everything in the book that I could think of, because not everything helped me personally, but just the hope that it will help somebody. Like I couldn't do the eye movement desensitizing because of my brain injury. I wasn't able to do that. So I didn't experience it, but I know how helpful it's been to other people. So that's why I still included it in my book.
I appreciate that very much. If you had held the TheraTappers in your hands to send the vibration right, left, and closed your eyes, do you think you would have been able to do the EMDR?
I really don't think, just even closing my eyes, sometimes it would make me dizzy and
yes. Okay. Right. Thank you for that. And yes, thank you, because you have a complication with brain injury on top of the PTSD.
Yes.
And that's a really important thing to be mindful of, because not everybody who has a trauma will have that level of sensitivity. But a brain trauma can complicate this exponentially for certain people.
Yes.
Really good distinction for our listeners and for all of us to think about. You have been so vulnerable and so present and available to us and to our audience, and we're extremely grateful for everything that you've done, for the heroic and heroic efforts that you've made to create a beautiful relationship and a beautiful family, and to support communities of people who are going through what you've gone through and preventing the suffering because of your work. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome.
Happy to do it. It's like nothing could stop me from doing it.
Yeah, you're on a mission, and I get it, and I celebrate your efforts. And Mike, I celebrate you and your recovery and your healing, all of your beautiful creative work with your hunting for gills as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to this. It's been something that we've wanted to provide you with. We'd love your feedback. Learn more about our newsletter. Thank you so much for joining us. All the very best.